Mary Jenkins stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning mist roll over the Yorkshire countryside. At 75 years old, she still moved with purpose as she wiped down the counter for the third time that morning. Ever since her husband, Robert, had passed away 5 years ago, she had found comfort in keeping everything spotlessly clean and perfectly organized. "Morning, Mum," a familiar voice called from the front door. James, her eldest son, let himself in with his own key. He did this every Sunday morning without fail, right after attending church service with his wife Emma and their 2 young children. "James, love," Mary smiled, turning from the window. "Tea's almost ready. Just need to fetch the biscuits." As Mary reached for the top shelf of her pantry, her arm trembled slightly. She stretched up on her toes, but the tin remained just out of reach. She heard James clear his throat behind her. "Here, let me get that for you," he said gently, easily retrieving the biscuit tin. He noticed how thin his mother's wrists looked as she opened it. "I've been doing this for myself for years," Mary said firmly, though her voice held a hint of defensive pride. "Don't you worry about me." James studied his mother carefully as they sat at the kitchen table. Her gray hair was neatly styled as always, and her clothes were pressed and proper. But he could see the slight shake in her hands as she poured the tea, and the dark circles under her eyes suggested many sleepless nights. "Mum, Emma, and I have been talking," James began carefully. "Perhaps it's time you had someone come in to help around the house. Just a few hours each week. Someone to do the heavier cleaning. Maybe help with the shopping." Mary's teacup clinked sharply against its saucer. "Help? What sort of help would I need? I've managed just fine all these years. This house has been in our family for 3 generations, and I know every corner of it." "I know you do, Mum, and you've done a wonderful job keeping it beautiful. But things are harder now than they used to be. We just want to make sure you're safe and comfortable." Mary set her cup down carefully and folded her hands in her lap. "When you're my age, James, you'll understand. Independence isn't just about doing things yourself. It's about keeping your dignity, your privacy, your way of life." James reached across the table and took his mother's hand. The skin felt papery thin beneath his fingers. "We would never take that away from you. This would be someone to help you, not replace you." The conversation continued in soft, patient tones. Mary shared stories of how she and Robert had bought the cottage when James was just a baby, how they had planted every rose bush in the garden together. James listened carefully, understanding that each memory was another reason his mother clung to her independence. By the time Emma and the children arrived for Sunday lunch, nothing had been decided, but James could see the worry in his wife's eyes as she observed Mary struggling to lift the heavy roast from the oven. When little Sophie asked for a glass of milk, Mary hesitated before opening the refrigerator. "Oh dear," she said softly. James and Emma exchanged glances as they noticed the carton of milk was well past its expiration date. After lunch, while the children played in the garden, James and Emma helped Mary with the washing up. They discovered several other items in the refrigerator that should have been thrown away days ago. When they moved to the sitting room, James noticed a pile of unopened letters on the mantelpiece. "Are these new, Mum?" he asked, picking up the stack. "Just advertisements, most likely." "I haven't had time to sort through them," Mary replied, but her voice lacked conviction. That evening, after returning home to their own house in the nearby town, James and Emma sat at their kitchen table discussing what they had observed. Emma, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital, had seen many families face similar challenges. "She's still sharp as a tack mentally," Emma said. "But physically, she's struggling more than she admits. And James, that milk in the fridge could have made her very ill." They decided to contact a local agency that provided home care services. After much discussion, they selected Helping Hands Home Care, which came highly recommended by several friends. James made the call the next morning, explaining their situation to Mrs. Peters, the agency director. "We have just the person for your mother," Mrs. Peters assured him. "Helen Davis is one of our most experienced care assistants. She's wonderful with reluctant clients and has been with us for 2 years." The following week, James arranged for Helen to meet Mary. He had prepared his mother carefully, emphasizing that this was just a trial period to see if extra help might make her life easier. Helen Davis arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning. She was in her early 50s with neatly bobbed brown hair and a professional demeanor. Her references were impeccable, and she spoke with confidence about her experience caring for elderly clients. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm here to make your life easier, not to take over," Helen said with a practiced smile. "We'll work together at your pace." Mary remained polite but distant throughout the first visit. As Helen checked around the cottage, making notes about tasks that might need attention, Mary watched her carefully. There was something in the way Helen examined things that made Mary feel like she was being assessed rather than helped. "She seems competent enough," Mary told James when he called that evening. But he could hear the reservation in her voice. "Give it a bit of time, Mum. It takes time to feel comfortable with someone new in your home." For the next few weeks, Helen came to the cottage 3 times a week. She helped with light housekeeping, prepared meals, and accompanied Mary to her doctor's appointments. James noticed improvements. The house was tidier, and Mary seemed to be eating better. But he also noticed his mother had become quieter, more withdrawn. One Sunday morning, when James arrived for his regular visit, Mary was sitting at the kitchen table looking uncomfortable. She was holding an envelope in her hands, turning it over repeatedly. "What's wrong, Mum?" James asked, immediately concerned. Mary glanced toward the sitting room, where Helen was dusting the mantelpiece. She leaned close to James and whispered, "There's something I need to tell you, James, something about Helen. I've been keeping quiet because I thought I might be imagining things, but I can't stay silent anymore." James felt a chill run down his spine. His mother's instincts had always been sharp, and the worry in her eyes was real. Whatever she was about to tell him would change everything they thought they knew about their carefully chosen care assistant. James pulled his chair closer to his mother, keeping his voice low. "What is it, Mum? You can tell me anything." Mary's hands trembled as she set the envelope down on the table. "Yesterday afternoon I was having my rest when I heard Helen on the phone in the kitchen. I didn't mean to listen, but she was talking. Quite loudly." "What did she say?" James asked, his stomach tightening with worry. "She was laughing about how easy it was to gain people's trust. She mentioned something about finances and said, 'The old lady has more money than she thinks. Just need to be patient.'" Mary's voice cracked slightly. "James, she was talking about me." James felt anger rising in his chest. He looked across the room where Helen was now arranging the cushions on the sofa. She seemed so normal, so professional, in her navy blue cardigan and comfortable shoes. How could she be planning something harmful? "Did she see you listening?" he asked. "No, I pretended to be sleeping. When she came to check on me, I kept my eyes closed and breathed deeply like I was napping." James reached for his mother's hand. "You did exactly right, Mum. What else happened?" "This morning, she brought these papers," Mary said, sliding the envelope toward him. "She said they were forms for extra support payments from the government. She wanted me to sign them right away, saying the deadline was today." James opened the envelope carefully. Inside were several official-looking documents. As he read through them, his frown deepened. The papers weren't about government support at all. They were authorization forms that would allow Helen to make financial decisions for Mary and access her bank accounts. "You didn't sign these, did you, Mum?" "No, love. I told her I needed to read them properly first and wanted to wait for my glasses. She seemed annoyed but said we could do it later." Helen appeared in the doorway, her smile appearing instantly. "Everything all right?" "Tea's ready if you'd like some, James." "Actually, Helen, could you prepare a snack for the children?" "They'll be here soon with Emma," James said, thinking quickly. "Of course," Helen replied, her smile never wavering as she returned to the kitchen. James lowered his voice further. "Mum, has anything else odd happened? Think carefully." Mary nodded slowly. "Last Tuesday she asked me about which bank I use and whether I had any investments. She said it was part of her routine questions to help plan my care better. But when I mentioned my savings account, she became very interested in how much money was in it." "Did you tell her?" "I avoided giving her exact numbers. Something didn't feel right about the way she kept asking. James felt a mix of relief and fear. His mother's instincts had protected her so far, but they needed to act quickly. He remembered Helen's references and how professional she had seemed during their first meeting. Had it all been an act? "You've been very clever, Mum. I'm proud of you for noticing these things." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "But we need to be careful now. Don't let her know we suspect anything." When Helen returned from the kitchen, James stood up briskly. "Mum, I just remembered I need to discuss something with Helen about next week's schedule." They moved to the dining room, out of Mary's earshot. "Helen, Mum's mentioned feeling a bit overwhelmed with the new routines. Maybe we should reduce your visits for a while. Let her adjust more gradually." Helen's professional mask dropped for just a moment, revealing a flash of annoyance. "Mrs. Jenkins is actually doing much better with consistent help. Reducing visits might confuse her." "I understand, but as her son, I need to follow what makes her comfortable. Let's make this week the last full schedule, and then we'll see." Helen forced her smile back. "Of course, whatever you think is best." As Helen gathered her things to leave, James walked her to the door. "About those forms earlier, Mum's quite methodical about paperwork. She likes to review everything with our family. Solicitor first." "Oh, of course," Helen said stiffly. "I'll let the office know about the reduced hours." After Helen left, James returned to the kitchen where Mary was making a fresh pot of tea. She moved more carefully than usual, as if each step required concentration. "We need to tell Thomas," James said, referring to his younger brother. "He works with the council housing department. He might know more about checking Helen's background." "James, I feel terrible about doubting her. What if I'm wrong? What if she really is trying to help? Mom, trust your instincts. They've kept you safe all these years." He helped her set down the heavy teapot. "Remember what Dad used to say? When something feels wrong, it usually is." Mary smiled sadly. "Your father always listened to my worries, never dismissed them as foolishness." That evening, after tucking his children into bed, James told Emma everything. She listened carefully, her nurse's training helping her process the information. "Many elderly care frauds start this way," Emma said. "The carer gains trust, isolates the client gradually, then moves to financial exploitation. Your mum's lucky she noticed the warning signs." They decided to call Thomas immediately, despite the late hour. As James dialed, he thought about all the vulnerable elderly people who might not have family watching out for them. How many others had Helen already targeted? The phone rang twice before Thomas answered. "James, everything all right? It's nearly 10 o'clock. Thomas, I need your help. It's about Mum's new care assistant. We think she might be planning to steal from her." Throughout the night, as rain began to patter against the windows, the three of them discussed their next steps. They agreed that time was crucial. If Helen felt threatened, she might accelerate her plans or disappear altogether. By morning, they had developed a plan. Thomas would quietly investigate Helen's employment history and qualifications. James would install a small camera in Mary's sitting room, disguised as a new clock. Emma would visit daily to keep Mary company and observe Helen more closely. Most importantly, they would protect Mary without making her feel helpless or foolish. Her sharp mind and strong instincts had already saved her from signing away her financial independence. Now her family would ensure justice was served. As dawn broke over the Yorkshire countryside, Mary stood at her kitchen window again, watching the mist lift. This time she felt a mix of emotions: betrayal, fear, but also determination. She had survived many challenges in her 75 years. This would not defeat her. The next morning, Thomas parked his car outside the village library and walked quickly to the reference section. As a council housing officer, he had access to various databases that could provide background information. He pulled out his notebook and began his investigation into Helen Davis. Within an hour, Thomas discovered troubling details. Helen's nursing qualifications were indeed valid, but her employment history had gaps. The Helping Hands Agency had apparently been her employer for only 6 months, not 2 years as she had claimed. More concerning, he found records of a Helen Janet Davis who had worked at 2 different care agencies that had closed following investigations into financial irregularities. His phone buzzed. It was a text from James. Helen just arrived at Mum's. Everything looks normal so far. James had arrived at his mother's cottage early that morning. He had installed the hidden camera the night before, positioned it carefully to capture most of the sitting room where Helen spent much of her time with Mary. The device looked like a simple mantel clock, blending perfectly with Mary's traditional decor. "Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins," Helen called cheerfully as she entered. "Beautiful day for a walk later, don't you think?" Mary nodded from her armchair, trying to appear natural despite her nervousness. "Yes, that would be lovely." James watched Helen carefully as she moved about the cottage. She seemed particularly interested in Mary's desk, straightening papers and organizing bills. When she thought neither of them was looking, she took a photo of a bank statement with her phone. "Mum needs to use the powder room," James announced, suddenly. "Helen, could you start lunch? I'll help her upstairs." Once they were alone in the bathroom, James whispered, "She was photographing your bank statement." Mary's face grew pale. "I left it out on purpose, James. I wanted to see what she would do." "You're brilliant, Mum," he whispered back. The camera caught everything. When they returned downstairs, Helen was preparing soup in the kitchen. She chatted pleasantly about village events and asked about Mary's grandchildren. But now James noticed how her questions always seemed to circle back to money and property matters. "Mrs. Jenkins, have you considered setting up a trust for your grandchildren?" Helen asked while stirring the soup. "Many of my clients find it helpful to plan ahead." Mary glanced at James nervously. "Oh, I hadn't really thought about it. These things are quite complicated, aren't they?" "Not at all," Helen assured her. "I've helped several clients with similar arrangements. You know, I have a friend who's a solicitor. He could explain everything to you. No cost, just friendly advice." "That's very kind," Mary replied cautiously. "But I prefer to handle financial matters with our family solicitor, Mr. Richardson. He's been with us for 40 years. Helen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, old habits and all that." After lunch, while Mary rested, James stepped outside to call his brother. The garden was peaceful, with birds singing in the hedgerows Mary had planted decades ago. "Thomas? I need to tell you what just happened." Thomas listened carefully as James described the photographed bank statement and Helen's continued interest in finances. "The camera got it all?" he asked. "Every detail. And Mum's been amazing. She's staying calm even though she's frightened." "I found something too," Thomas said. "There are 2 agencies that closed after complaints about missing money. Both had a Helen Davis working there. Different middle names, slightly different ages, but the descriptions match perfectly." That evening, Emma arrived at the cottage for her planned visit. As a nurse, she understood the delicate balance needed to maintain Mary's independence while ensuring her safety. She had brought photograph albums to help establish the appearance of a normal family gathering. "Helen, dear," Emma called from the sitting room where she was looking at old family photos with Mary. "Would you like to see pictures of James and Thomas as children?" Helen joined them eagerly. Emma had deliberately chosen an album that included photos of Mary, signing important documents with their family solicitor over the years. She wanted Helen to understand that Mary had experienced professional advisors. "Oh, look at this one." Emma pointed to a photo of Mary at her bank's grand opening 20 years ago. "Mum's been with the same branch manager for ages, haven't you?" Mary nodded, catching on to Emma's subtle message. "Yes, Mr. Peters has been wonderful. He always calls to confirm any large transactions personally." Emma noticed Helen's expression change slightly. Good. The message was clear. As the day progressed, the family's strategy became clearer. They would allow Helen to think her plans were moving forward while gathering evidence. The hidden camera captured her making another phone call during a break, this time mentioning stubborn old fool and need to move faster. When Helen left that evening, she seemed more agitated than usual. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'll see you tomorrow. Please do think about what I mentioned regarding the financial planning. Time waits for no one, you know." After she left, James, Emma, and Mary sat together in the cozy sitting room. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the oriental rug, and the old grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. "You were both wonderful today," Mary said softly. "I couldn't do this without you." "Mum, you're the one who spotted the problem first," James reminded her. "We're just following your lead." That night, as they reviewed the day's camera footage, they saw Helen's true nature emerge when she thought no one was watching. She had searched through Mary's desk drawers, photographed various documents, and made notes on her phone. But they also noticed something else. Helen seemed nervous, checking her phone frequently and glancing at the windows as if expecting someone. "She might have a partner," Emma suggested. "Maybe someone who helps her identify targets or pressures, the victims." Thomas nodded. "The police will want all this evidence, but we need to be absolutely certain first. One accusation might not be enough to protect other vulnerable people." As they made plans for the next day, Mary surprised them all with her determination. "Tomorrow, I'll tell her I've decided to change my will to include a donation to the local Care Workers charity. That should reveal her true intentions." Her sons and daughter-in-law looked at her with newfound respect. The elderly woman who had seemed frail just weeks ago now showed the steely resolve that had helped her through decades of life's challenges. They were witnessing not weakness, but strength forged through years of experience and wisdom. The investigation was entering its final stages, and Helen Davis had no idea that her careful plans were unraveling. Captured on video and documented by a family who refused to let their loved one become another vulnerable victim. The following morning arrived with a thick fog rolling in from the Yorkshire moors. James arrived early at his mother's cottage, finding her already dressed and waiting in the kitchen. She wore her best cardigan and her silver hair was neatly pinned up. There was a determined set to her jaw that James recognized from his childhood when his mother had decided something important. "Ready for today's performance?" Mary asked with a small smile. "You're remarkably calm, Mum," James observed, helping himself to tea from the pot. "When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that fear and worry help no one. We have a plan and we'll see it through." Helen arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, as always. She wore the same navy cardigan and comfortable walking shoes, carrying her usual bag of supplies. But James noticed how her eyes immediately scanned the room, taking in every detail. "Good morning, everyone," Helen announced brightly. "What lovely weather for our walk later." Mary looked up from the morning paper. "Actually, Helen, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. Perhaps you're right about the financial planning." Helen's attention sharpened immediately. "Really? I'm so glad you're considering it." "Yes, well, at my age, one must be practical." Mary folded the newspaper carefully. "I've decided to update my will. I want to leave something to the Care Workers charity. After all, they do such important work." James watched Helen's reaction carefully. For just a moment, her carefully maintained smile faltered. Her grip tightened on her handbag. "That's very generous of you," Helen managed to say, "though perhaps there's time for that later. First, we should secure your own financial future." "Oh no, I'm quite decided," Mary insisted. "I rang Mr. Richardson early this morning. He'll be visiting this afternoon to help me make the changes." Helen's face grew slightly pale. "This afternoon? That's rather sudden, isn't it?" Emma arrived just then, greeting everyone warmly. She had arranged to visit that morning to keep up the appearance of regular family support. "What's this about Mr. Richardson?" "Mum, you didn't mention calling the solicitor." "I didn't want to trouble anyone," Mary replied. "But at my age, these things shouldn't be delayed." While Emma helped Mary organize some old documents for the solicitor's visit, James noticed Helen repeatedly checking her phone. She seemed distracted, dropping a teacup that thankfully didn't break on the carpeted floor. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry," Helen apologized. "I'm usually more careful." "No harm done," Mary assured her. "Perhaps we could have that walk now while the fog lifts?" During the walk, Helen seemed to be paying minimal attention to Mary's safety on the uneven pathway. Instead, she was deep in conversation on her phone, walking slightly ahead. Emma stayed close to Mary while James positioned himself to listen to Helen's whispered conversation. No, the old woman's getting legal help, Helen muttered into her phone. We'll need to… Yes, I understand. Tomorrow then. When they returned to the cottage, Helen excused herself to use the powder room. While she was gone, a car pulled up outside. Thomas stepped out, looking official in his council, employee badge and carrying a clipboard. Thought I'd check up on you all, Thomas announced as he entered. James mentioned you were having some documentation looked at today. Helen emerged from the powder room, clearly surprised to see Thomas. Mr. Jenkins, how nice to see you again. Actually, since I'm here, would you mind if I verified your employment credentials? Thomas asked professionally. It's just a routine check the council does with care workers in the area. Of course not, Helen replied, though her smile looked strained, though I'm not sure I have everything with me. No problem. I can call the agency to confirm. Thomas pulled out his phone. Let me just check with Helping Hands. What followed was a tense moment as Thomas dialed. He spoke briefly, then hung up, his expression serious. Helen, there seems to be some confusion. The agency says you haven't worked there for 6 months. They terminated your position after receiving complaints. Helen's face flushed red. There must be some mistake. I can explain. At that moment, a police car pulled up outside. Constable Williams and his partner stepped out, having been called by Thomas earlier that morning. Mrs. Davis? Constable Williams asked at the door. We'd like to have a word with you. Everything happened quickly then. Helen tried to maintain her composure, insisting on misunderstandings and mix-ups. But when confronted with the evidence Thomas had gathered, including the medical board's warnings about her forged credentials, her defenses crumbled. I need that money, Helen suddenly blurted out. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to maintain a facade of respectability? The cars, the clothes, the house I rent. I couldn't go back to being poor again. Mary, who had been sitting quietly, spoke up clearly. But you weren't poor, dear. You chose to prey on people who trusted you. That's not poverty, that's greed. The police searched Helen's handbag, finding photographs of multiple bank statements, not just Mary's. They also discovered notes detailing other potential elderly targets in the village and surrounding towns. As Helen was led away in handcuffs, she turned to Mary one last time. You could have been set for life if you'd just cooperated. I am set for life, Mary replied firmly. I have my family, my friends, and my self-respect. That's more than you'll ever have. After the police car drove away, the fog finally lifted completely, revealing a beautiful autumn day. The Jenkins family sat together in Mary's sitting room, cups of tea warming their hands. We need to call the other elderly people she might have targeted, Emma said practically. Warn them. And congratulate Mum, James added, squeezing his mother's hand. Your instincts saved not just yourself, but possibly dozens of others. Mary looked out the window at her beloved Yorkshire countryside. Your father always said that when something doesn't feel right, it usually isn't. I just wish Helen had used her talents for good instead of harm. The investigation had ended better than they could have hoped. Police discovered that Helen was part of a larger ring targeting elderly people across Yorkshire. Her arrest led to the capture of 3 other suspects. The bogus solicitor she had mentioned turned out to be real, a disbarred lawyer now facing charges for his part in the scheme. As for the Helping Hands agency, they implemented stricter background checks and regular employment verifications. The scandal prompted local authorities to review all home care services in the area, ensuring better protection for vulnerable residents. That evening, as James prepared to leave, Mary walked him to the door. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Thank you for believing me from the start, she said softly. You taught us to trust our instincts, Mum. We just followed your example. As James drove home, he reflected on the past few days. His mother had faced a predator and won, not through physical strength but through wisdom, vigilance, and the support of her family. The experience had shown him that independence in old age wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to ask for help and whom to trust. The small clock on the mantel, hiding its camera, ticked steadily as Mary prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she could rest peacefully, knowing she had protected not only herself but her community from a dangerous threat. In the weeks following Helen's arrest, Mary's cottage gradually returned to its peaceful rhythm. The camera hidden in the mantel clock was removed, and the sitting room felt like itself again. But the experience had changed the family in subtle ways. They visited more frequently now, not out of worry, but from a renewed appreciation for the time they had together. James arrived for Sunday lunch to find his mother preparing roast chicken, something she hadn't done alone in months. The kitchen filled with familiar aromas that brought back childhood memories. Emma had brought fresh flowers from her garden, bright yellow daffodils that announced spring's arrival. "The whole village is talking about what happened," Mary mentioned, as she stirred the gravy. Mrs. Thompson from the post office said we're heroes. "You're the hero, Mum," James corrected gently. "You protected everyone by speaking up." Thomas had already arrived and was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing documents. "The council wants you to speak at the community hall next week," he told Mary. "They're starting a new program to educate elderly residents about financial safety." Mary paused, wooden spoon hovering over the gravy pot. "Me? Speaking to a crowd?" "Who better?" Emma asked, setting the table. "You lived through it. Your story could help others recognize similar situations." The day of the community meeting arrived crisp and clear. The village hall filled with familiar faces, neighbors Mary had known for decades, shopkeepers from the high street, and residents from the nearby retirement homes. James and Emma sat in the front row, offering encouraging smiles. Mary stood at the podium, wearing her favorite lavender dress. Her voice started softly but grew stronger as she shared her experience. She spoke honestly about her initial doubts, how she had worried about appearing foolish or paranoid. "I almost dismissed my own feelings," she admitted. "I thought perhaps I was imagining things because I was afraid of getting older, of needing help. But our instincts are gifts. They protect us when we listen to them." In the audience, several elderly women nodded knowingly. Mr. Peterson from Rose Cottage spoke up. "I nearly signed something last month that felt wrong. My nephew helped me get proper legal advice instead. Turned out to be a timeshare scam." After her talk, Mary answered questions for nearly an hour. People shared their own close calls with financial predators. The discussion became a community conversation about protection and support. 2 months later, Mary received a letter from the Yorkshire Police Authority thanking her for her testimony, which had helped close 15 separate cases of elderly financial abuse. Helen Davis received a 5-year prison sentence and her associates received similar punishments. But the most significant change came in how families throughout the village approached elderly care. The Jenkins family's experience inspired others to be more involved without being controlling. Adult children visited more often. Neighbors checked on each other regularly. The local bank implemented a flagging system for unusual account activity. On a warm June afternoon, Mary sat in her garden with her grandchildren. Sophie and young Robert were helping her plant summer vegetables. James and Emma relaxed on the bench watching the simple domestic scene with contentment. "Grandma," Sophie asked, looking up from digging holes for tomato plants, "was Mrs. Davis very bad?" Mary considered the question carefully. "She made very wrong choices, dear. But what's important is that we learned from it. We learned to talk to each other about worries, to trust ourselves, and to ask for help when needed." The garden thrived that summer as never before. Mary had more energy now, perhaps because she worried less. The family had found the right care assistant, Margaret from the village whose own mother Mary had known for 50 years. Trust had been rebuilt, but this time with proper foundations. By autumn, Mary often walked to the village center alone again, greeting friends and shopkeepers. But now there was an invisible network of people watching out for each other, not with suspicion but with genuine care. The coffee shop displayed a notice board with tips for recognizing financial scams. The bank offered free seminars on protecting savings. One crisp October morning, Mary found a note in her mailbox. It was from Margaret Thompson, whose husband had dementia. The note explained how Mary's story had prompted Margaret to investigate her husband's new financial advisor. They discovered the advisor had been charging excessive fees and making risky investments. Thanks to Mary's example, Margaret's family took action before any serious damage occurred. At Christmas, the Jenkins family gathered at the cottage as always. This year, they were joined by the police constable who had handled Helen's case, now a friend. They raised their glasses not just to health and happiness but to courage and community. To listening to our hearts, Mary toasted, and to the people who believe us when we do. That evening, as snow began to fall outside, Mary sat by her window, reflecting on the year's journey. She had faced her fears, protected herself and others, and emerged stronger. The experience hadn't made her cynical or afraid. Instead, it had shown her the power of family bonds and community spirit. The hidden camera was gone, but the lessons remained. Trust must be earned, not assumed. Independence doesn't mean isolation. And sometimes the strongest people are those who admit their vulnerabilities and ask for help. As the fire crackled in the grate and her family's laughter filled the rooms, Mary smiled to herself. Life at 75 held more adventures than she'd imagined. And surrounded by people who truly cared for her, she felt safer than ever before. The Yorkshire fog would come and go with the seasons, but the light in Mary's cottage burned steady and bright, a beacon of wisdom, courage, and the enduring strength of family love.